one-handed, half-ass today. Andy here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Frankenstein, the book, versus Frankenstein, the film. So let's get into it. You can probably hear my dog chewing, that's probably really annoying. We have a lot to talk about because the film and the movie have little similarities and many differences. It's interesting that when you hear the term Frankenstein, I think I can speak for everybody when I say you think of the Boris Karloff, green monster, bolts in his neck, big, unintelligible monster. That was the Boris Karloff version of the 1930s film Frankenstein. This novel is much different than that. Mary Shelley Frankenstein was published January 1st, 1818. A long ass time ago. The film Frankenstein was made in 1931. Now there is a short film of Frankenstein, which I will leave linked down below. There's a YouTube video of it, and I think it's just a few minutes long, maybe 20 minutes long or something, so I will link that down below. And I believe that's the first version of a Frankenstein film that had been made. Okay, so first let's kind of review what happens in the movie. So the movie is interesting because it uses a lot of the same character names, but they're not the same people. The main character in the novel is Victor Frankenstein, and he's the one that creates the monster. But in the movie Frankenstein, his name is... I already forgot it. Get your life together. It's Dr. Henry Frankenstein, and he has an assistant named Fritz. So what happens is it opens in the scene and we see Dr. Henry Frankenstein and Fritz going around kind of collecting body parts and stealing corpses and cutting down hanged men and just trying to find body parts to create a monster. And they obviously need a brain, so they go to Henry's old teacher, Dr. Waldman, and they go to his laboratory, and he has two brains encased, and we're kind of shown briefly Dr. Waldman speaking to his colleagues, talking about how there is a significant difference between the brain of a normal human being and the brain of a deranged killer. So Fritz goes, he sneaks in at night to steal the brains. He drops the normal brain and he is only left with the killer's brain. So he takes that and does not tell Frankenstein. They end up using that brain. We end up seeing Dr. Frankenstein bring this monster that he created to life. What's interesting is he's kind of an intelligible monster, and when you think of Frankenstein, you think of like, ugh. But from the very beginning, he knows basic commands. So Dr. Frankenstein tells him to sit up, he sits up. He opens the window to let light in, and the monster kind of reaches for it. So we see that he does have some form of intelligence, just obviously not that of a normal human. They have a torch and they bring it in, and the monster gets frightened of it, and they kind of think that he's like ready to attack them, so they lock him in a dungeon. He kills people because he's scared, and he ends up getting away. Long story short, I'm not going to go into like every little detail. But after his escape, he meets a little girl, and the little girl is throwing flowers into the water, and she hands them to Frankenstein, or to Frankenstein's monster, and the monster takes it, and he's throwing the flowers in. He runs out of flowers, and so he picks up the little girl and tosses her in the water. When she doesn't resurface, he gets upset and he runs away. The father of the drowned little girl kind of carries her dead corpse through the town and says that this monster has murdered his daughter, and this creates a huge mob, and the mob and Frankenstein chase the monster to this tower thing. What do you call that? Windmill, yeah. Chase him to this windmill, and they end up burning this windmill down with Frankenstein inside. With Frankenstein's monster inside. That's kind of the basic story of Frankenstein. Alright, so as I said, the book is very different from the film. So it's interesting because it's kind of told, it's a story told through a story. Okay, so in this one we have Victor Frankenstein, and he is the same as Henry Frankenstein in the film. We have Henry Clerval, which is Frankenstein's best friend. We have Elizabeth, who was adopted into their family and kind of raised as a sister, but then his father wants them to get married later on, whatever. And then we have Robert Walton. So Walton is I would call him like a captain of a ship, and they're kind of voyaging up to the Arctic Circle. And so the story is actually told through him. His boat gets stuck, and the people aboard the ship are worried that they won't be able to break through the Arctic ice. And he ends up finding Victor Frankenstein suffering from essentially like pneumonia in the Arctic Circle. And so they save him, and they bring him, and they make him a little bit healthier so he's able to explain how he got there, because they're very surprised to just see a man in the Arctic Circle with nothing else. So the story is actually told through Robert Walton, who is writing letters to, I believe, his sister. And in those letters, the book unfolds. So it's a story told through a story. In this, we meet Victor Frankenstein. He has an interest in sciences and chemistry. He lives with I believe he has 2 brothers, and then his adopted sister, which is Elizabeth, his father, his mother. His mother ends up dying, and he is sent off to college. And it's interesting that it happens so close together that, you know, he loses this woman whom he loves so much, and then he goes and tries to kind of reanimate life. So it seems like in my head those 2 things are connected, like his pain from seeing his mom pass away and then being left without his family, to, you know, wanting to create life out of nothing. For me, that seemed like a catalyst as to what started the whole process. So he ends up he's studying with a bunch of teachers that he really enjoys, and then he decides to create a monster. Now, not much is actually talked about in the novel about him creating the monster, which is interesting because in most Frankenstein movies, that is kind of like the story before the climax, is how these professors, how these scientists are attempting to create life out of, you know, electricity or whatever it is. That's kind of skipped altogether. Here's the description of the monster through Mary Shelley's book. His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful, great God. His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was a luscious black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. So he's yellow, so much different than the Boris Karloff version. So then we come to find out that Frankenstein created this monster and was just completely horrified by it. So he ran away. And the monster, of course, took off as well. And when Frankenstein returned, the monster was nowhere to be found, and he kind of was just like, ugh, hope this works out. It doesn't, spoiler alert. So his friend Henry Clerval comes to stay with him for a while, and Victor falls really ill. He's kind of, I think, just tormented with the fact that he created something that shouldn't have been created, kind of this abomination that he set free into the world. He slowly starts to get better, and comes to find out that his younger brother was murdered. He just kind of has a feeling that it was the monster that did it. So when he gets close, he actually sees the monster like in the shadows and knows that he was the one who had killed his brother. When this happens, he is obviously distraught and, you know, kind of thinks it's his own fault for his brother's demise, which it kind of is. Then he goes after the monster, and the monster actually makes contact with him. Now here is where the monster first speaks, and this is a huge difference between the 2 monsters in the film and the book. Is the monster in Frankenstein is almost poetic in speech. He's very intelligible, you know, speaks almost poetically, very beautifully, very flowery. It's a, you know, stark contrast. The monster sits down and kind of tells his story. So what happens is he wandered aimlessly through the woods, and he found, after he left, and he found these people who lived in the forest. And so for months he watched them, and he started slowly picking up on their language, and he started to feel a bond with these people. And he was too scared to kind of go and introduce himself to them. He knew that his appearance was horrifying just from the little interactions he had had with them. And so he kept his distance, but he did a lot of work for them. He would like bring them firewood, and he really, really did love these people. So he feels a lot of emotion for these people. So he says that when they were unhappy, I felt depressed. When they rejoiced, I sympathized in their joys. And then also at one point, he even says, I looked upon them as superior beings. So he felt close to them, but he also kind of felt like they were superior to him. Now, whether that was in, just simply their knowledge or their ability to express emotions or their ability to be unified as a family, I'm not sure, but it's interesting that at first that is how he felt. He decided to introduce himself. Now, the father of the family was blind, so he decided that as the children left one day, he would go in and introduce himself to the father. So he did so, and the father regarded him kindly, and he was so overjoyed and so happy. And when the children came home, they ran him out and were terrified of him. The monster ran off because he was scared. When he came back, the family had left. So that was kind of his first interaction with mankind, where he craved camaraderie and friendship so deeply and then was rejected. So he got really upset and he ended up burning down the cabin, which again is a huge difference of the two monsters, because in the Boris Karloff film, the monster is scared of fire, and in this film, the monster actually uses fire to destroy that, kind of like a symbol of the humans that he interacted with and held at such a high regard. That's kind of our first downfall of the monster. So because he learns because he learns language through the family, he's introduced to books, and he picks up a lot through his years of following these people and listening to them and stalking them, essentially. Finds actually in his coat that he had from the laboratory of Victor Frankenstein's journal. So he realizes who his creator is, and kind of like, what am I trying to say? He's determined to seek vengeance on his creator. So when he goes and he runs into this little boy, and the little boy tells him that he is related to Frankenstein, the monster murders him in kind of like a fit of rage. So this is the downfall of the monster. The monster is he possesses a feeling of loneliness that a lot of people feel. So in a way, the monster is more human than monster. So we're still on the hill, he's still talking to Victor Frankenstein, and he's talking about how he read books. And so he's talking specifically here about Paradise Lost, which is John Milton's epic poem. It talks about Satan's descent from heaven and how the earth is created, and it kind of follows Satan along this journey of rebelling against God. And so he talks about how he read Paradise Lost, and at first he actually kind of saw a lot of himself in Adam. And he said, like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He came forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the essential care of his creator. But then he says, I was wrecked, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as a fitter emblem of my condition. For often like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. Very, very clear symbol that, now he's kind of going to the dark side. So this is where things take a turn for the worse. So he's kind of explaining his pain and agony to Victor. He says to him, I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate itself with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create. So essentially he says, I'm lonely, nobody loves me, all I want in life is friendship, and that's something that all of us want. So he says to Victor, you must make me a girlfriend, a bride. Once you make her and I will leave you alone. We won't bug you anymore. But dude, I'm hurting, bro, and I want a girlfriend, so make her. I do find myself sympathizing with the monster in Frankenstein, because really it shows from the beginning that it kind of was a matter of circumstances as to how he went about becoming a murderer. It wasn't just that he woke up a vicious killer, it's that he was hurt and rejected by the only individuals he came into contact with. Both stories elicit some sort of sympathy for the monster, because in even the Boris Karloff version, he does have some understanding of human function and emotion, but you can tell that a lot is missing, right? And it's interesting too, because he doesn't just wake up a bloodthirsty killer either. So that is something that they both have in common, where because of their circumstances, they're kind of led to become the monsters that people see them as. We're not condoning his behavior or anything, but I'm saying I do feel for the creature, and I understand why he wanted someone similar. So Victor says, all right, I'll do it, but it's going to take me a while. So he again leaves his family and he goes off and he's like, I'm gonna make this guy a girlfriend, which he does. Again, this part is passed over quite rapidly, but, and then like all the while he kind of sees the monster lurking around. So he makes this horrifying bride of Frankenstein. He sees the monster and the monster's kind of watching him, and he realizes, I can't do this. On the off chance that I do make this and then there are two of them and they take over the world, probably not a good idea. I already created one monster, he's already murdered people, he's already destroyed things, he's already told me how much he envies humans, he has a lot of animosity towards them at this point. So he figures that letting another one go would not be a wise decision. When Victor destroys his monster, Frankenstein's like, that's it bro, he promises to kind of murder everybody in Frankenstein's life. So after this is done, Frankenstein's like, you know what, I'm gonna marry Elizabeth. I've been putting it off for a long time because I've been dealing with this crazy monster that I created. I'm gonna go marry Elizabeth and live a happy life, and you know, I'll just like watch out for the monster if he comes to try to kill me. Well, he ends up coming and killing Elizabeth, and he also kills Henry Clerval too, which is his best friend. So, oh, and then also Frankenstein's father dies of old age, of broken heart, I don't know. He just dies because he's old as shit. And so now Frankenstein's kind of left alone. So he's like, you know what, forget this, I'm going after this guy. Okay, so at this point we're led to the beginning of the story where Walton is talking about how he found Frankenstein. Frankenstein is finishing up about his story to the monster. He fears that now he is too weak and too old, and that he's worried that he'll die before he is able to destroy his creation, which does happen. Walton comes in and sees the monster in the same room as Frankenstein's body, and he tries to explain that, you know, he had so much anger and hatred towards his creator, towards Frankenstein, but now that Frankenstein is dead, all of that hatred has ceased. So he says that he pitied Frankenstein. My pity amounted to horror, I warned to myself. But when I discovered that he, the offer at once of my existence and of its unspeakable torments, dared to hope for happiness, and while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, then impotent envy and bitter indignation filled me with an insatiable thirst for vengeance. Okay, so then he says, now that he's seeing Frankenstein, now it is ended. There is my last victim. And then he basically tells Wharton, like, look, now that he's dead, I'm just gonna kill myself. And the very last sentence is, he sprang from the cabin window as he said this, upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves and lost in the darkness and distance. It's really sad. It's a sad story, but beautifully written. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys soon. Bye!